Hello everyone, and welcome to our discussion on properly configuring and utilizing Design Manager when your client pays your vendor directly. My name is Brad, and I'll be hosting the demonstration today. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to enter them into the questions pane under GoToWebinar panel. If the question is outside of the scope of today's discussion, please email them to support@designmanager.com. And lastly, if you miss a portion of the webinar or want to review any of our past discussions, go to our Help Center at knowledge.designmanager.com, go to the Webinars menu, select Recorded Webinars, and you can review any of our past discussions at your leisure. And as usual, I'll be using examples in both Design Manager and Design Manager Professional. I will, however, discuss a function called Agent for Processing that is only available in the Professional platform, but will do so towards the end of the webinar, so our Design Manager Cloud attendees can opt out if desired. Remember, if you'd like to see a function in one platform or the other, don't hesitate to enter it into the questions pane. So let's get started. Some firms, either by their own decision or by a client's insistence, are using a method of ordering merchandise in which the client pays the vendor directly for said merchandise. Typically, the design firm then charges the client a fee for services, but does not charge the client for actual product, i.e. because the client is paying the vendor themselves. Now, none of us at Design Manager are tax professionals by any means, and we are unable to comment on the laws of all 50 states and therefore can neither recommend nor discourage this practice. But today we will describe how to use Design Manager when your firm requires this practice. But let's first review some considerations that should be noted before deciding whether or not this method of doing business will work for your firm. First, obviously there'll be a little bit more record keeping if you want to keep track of what is occurring between the client and the vendor, particularly with payment information. Although Design Manager will track what is happening between you and the vendor with the order, there's no mechanism in Design Manager to specifically track or report on the activities that occur between the client and the vendor, particularly when payments are made, how they're made, etc. Secondly, the vendor may not be happy to have clients purchasing merchandise under your account or using your resale number, since the client has no such relationship with the vendor. You may want to check with your vendor or vendors to see if this is going to be an issue. Third, the vendor may not charge the client sales tax. This situation may cause two problems. First, the client may be purchasing using your sales tax exemption number, which might not be legal. Second, the client is obligated to pay use tax on the purchases if the vendor has not charged them sales tax. If the sales tax audit occurs and the client has not paid his use tax obligation, you may find yourself responsible for the sales tax. Lastly, and this is extremely important, you cannot record vendor deposits, vendor invoices for such purchases by the client into Design Manager. You will be inappropriately affecting your financial statements, and reversing such transactions will be extremely time-consuming and difficult. So do not enter any deposits or vendor invoices when purchasing for a project in this manner. Okay. Now, so what do we need to do to implement this practice in Design Manager? So, actually, it's not that difficult at all. Let's go over the necessary settings, and I'll describe the purpose of each along the way while doing so. The first setting we want to configure is the invoice pricing for the project on the Project Advanced Options window. So in Design Manager, we'll go to our project and specifications. Let's go down to our Hilson Pocono Home. We'll go to the project window, click on the Defaults tab to get to the Advanced Markup button, which finally brings us to our Project Advanced Options, and we want to go to the Invoice tab. For our professional users, you want to hop over to your Project tab, go to your Projects button, select the project, hit Edit, and from here it's very similar, as you can see, to get to the Advanced Options. Now, what we want to do is set all of our component types, merchandise, freight, crating, etc., for the pricing model to always actual. Doing so is going to prevent us from invoicing the client for any good or service except for our design fee. It's all going to be set to always actual. Now our design fee component type will be set to always proposal. Now since we're never going to be recording any vendor invoices for purchases made, the other two selections, always actual or automatic, would be ineffective. So we want to be sure that our design fee is set to always proposal. I also like to go to the proposal tab and set my design fee style to either list, which will print that figure immediately beneath each item, or total, which will have the entire design fee listed in the totals region of the proposal. This allows the client to easily see what the merchandise is going to cost them and what our design fee would be at the proposal stage. Now, if we want to apply a design fee percentage to each of the components, we can make an additional configuration. Now, if you're going to charge a flat amount, say an even $10,000 for a project, rather than a particular percentage, you can skip this step. But if you're going to charge a percentage, let's say 30%, on each of the items and have Design Manager calculate that design fee for you, this is a very handy configuration. So here, we want to go to our General tab, and we want to just make sure that all of our pricing percentages are going to be set to 0, except for our design fee. This is where we put in our percentage. Let's use 30% in our example today. And we want to have design fee set as a percentage type, not to markup, not to discount, but to the specialized fee option. We'd also like to use the auto selection. Now the auto selection is going to have Design Manager create a design fee component for each merchandise component automatically, which tremendously aids in adding our specifications rapidly and accurately, as we're going to see in a moment. Go ahead and save that. That's an additional step. Notice I've already pre-configured another project, our Carter's Pennington home, with the exact same configurations. I have design fee at 30%. In this example, I'm not going to be charging my client for any merchandise, freight, etc. So I have all my taxable information and my included deposit unselected. But I have my design fee set as taxable in my locale. I'll have it in deposit if necessary, and I have the auto selection made. I have my proposal set to total, and all of my invoice pricing is set correct as we just discussed. Let's go look at how some of these items appear when we have this design fee set for our automatic configuration. So we'll go under our Carter's Pennington home, we'll go to the outdoor living area, and we can see, go down to the component, each of my components have their cost and an associated design fee created for us. So this is the cost of the sofa, and here's my 30%, which is calculating the price for us. And we can see that again on the chairs. In this case, the unit cost is $400, the extended cost is $800, and we calculate our fee of 30% on that value, and so on. And let's add an item to see how that functions. We'll create a new item in our outdoor living area, another item for outdoor living area, quantity, unit of measure, let's put this as furniture, and if we click on the add button as indicated by the green plus sign, get down to our component window, and let's say that it's going to cost us an even $1,000. Now notice, as soon as I tab out of the cost field, Design Manager calculates my prices through and it pre-configures my design fee for me. It takes the value of the item, puts it right into the cost, uses the fee pricing to calculate the price for me. And again, further notice that I'm only going to be taxing on the fee. There's going to be no true purchase of the merchandise itself, so that's non-taxable, at least in my example. And if we click OK, we have a fifth item into our outdoor living area. Now, let's go ahead and see how that's going to appear on the purchase on the proposal itself. So we'll jump over to Documents and Accounting. And let's make a proposal for our Carter's Pennington home. And this will be our outdoor living area. It's called outdoor furniture. We can select all of our items, tag all. Let's go ahead and get to our print preview. By having Design Manager configured in this method, we can see and show our client that this will be their purchase price for the merchandise itself. Notice the asterisk here, as we'll discuss in a moment. And at the bottom, the subtotal is all of the costs that they'll be incurring to purchase the furniture themselves. And here's our design fee. Only our design fee does not have the asterisk shown, so it's going to denote that it would be actually taxable, and there's the sales tax on our design fee. So we can provide this to the client to see what their total expenditure would be at this point. Any deposit that I have requested is only on my design fee itself. So Design Manager can very nicely present a proposal for your client in this method. And there we go. Now, you may say to yourself, well, I don't charge a flat 30% on a particular project. I'm just going to have a singular amount, maybe $10,000 or $15,000 for the project, and the percentage thereof may actually fluctuate. Well, we can do that as well. In that case, we're going to create just a single item for the design fee, but we do have to make a few similar configuration changes. So let's use our Carter's Brigantine Beach home as an example. We'll edit. Now, I'm sure, as you all know, we'll go to Defaults, Advanced Markup. And in this case, notice I'm using design fee set to discount. And I know that sounds a little bit unusual, but you'll see why that's handy momentarily. And since I'm not charging a particular percentage, I'm leaving that set to 0. But I am indicating that in my area it's taxable, and I'll include it in the deposit if desired. And like our previous example, if we go to our Proposal tab, we can see in this case I have my design fee set to combined, as it's going to be the only entry on my proposal or perhaps invoice. And speaking of the invoice, we also have everything set to always actionable, just as we've previously discussed. My design fee is set to combined, so it's in the body of the document, and of course I'm using the always proposal setting here as well, as we discussed on the other projects. And now in this case, we can create a new item for our Brigantine Beach home. Design fee for project. We don't need a quantity or unit of measure. We can use perhaps professional services as our sales category. And if we go down to the component window by clicking our Add button, I could change my component type from merchandise to design fee. And now, since I'm in a discount mode, all I have to do is enter in my desired amount to the client. And let's say I'll be charging them $15,000 for my design fee. Click OK. We have our total estimated price at design fee of $15,000. And then we could create a proposal for our design fee. We have our singular item, and notice all of the value is recorded in the design fee categorization. And if we look at our print preview window, we can see by Selecting the combined option, it's being displayed in the body of the document just as we would desired. And of course, we subtotal the sales tax, etc. And there's our deposit requested if I'm going to be asking for some money up front. So that's how to handle it if we're doing a single design fee amount rather than putting a percentage onto each of the items as we did in the previous example. Either way, both very simple to implement in Design Manager and extremely effective as well. Now, how about purchase orders? Well, the purchase orders are going to be made exactly as we do for traditional clients for whom we're actually making the purchases with the vendors, except for one last setting, particularly if we're using the automatic design fee as we saw. So let's take another look at some of our advanced options. Let's go back to our Carter's Pennington home. Defaults, advanced markup. And now on our PO or purchase order tab, I want to set my design fee to ignore. Remember, on our Carter's Pennington home, we have it configured so that Design Manager automatically creates a design fee component for each merchandise that we enter. All of those additional, or as we call them, associated components would also be displayed in the purchase order window and perhaps even included on some of our order tracking reports. By setting it to ignore on our PO tab, we're going to prevent them from appearing in those areas. And if we go ahead and take a look, let's make a purchase order for our Carter's Pennington home. Notice I'm only seeing components of type either merchandise or freight. All of those associated design fee components are not displayed. And let's say we want to purchase all of our merchandise for the outdoor living area. Let's use a tag by location. Select all of our components quite quickly. Okay, there's our generated purchase order. And notice from here, the PO looks exactly as it would for a traditional purchase project. And there we go. So the purchasing aspect, or creating the purchase orders, has very little difference if we're using, if we're in a situation where our clients are paying the vendors directly. Now, as I've said before, we won't be inputting any bills or deposits from our vendors for purchases into Design Manager under any circumstances. But you may want to record when a client has made a payment to the vendor or other order tracking information if the client is tasking you to track all the orders for them. Well, we're going to use the purchase order status window for that purpose. And to access the purchase order status, highlight the purchase order and click the status button. Alternatively, you could right-click and do order status. That gets us to our purchase order status window. For our professional users, you would maintain yourself on the project tab, go to documents, go to your project purchase orders, and on the purchase order window, highlight the purchase order and click the receiving status button, which again brings up our purchase order status window. And from here, it's very similar between the two platforms. Now, I could, as I said, you could certainly still maintain all of the information, all of the dialogue with the vendors, so they're providing you information on how the order is being tracked. You could enter in your acknowledgement information, of course, if the PO is acknowledged. You could enter in any of your receiving expected ship information as well, as you may traditionally do already. As far as any payment information between the client and the vendor, however, I always recommend to use the Notes tab. And if the vendor or client has indicated that they've received payment or perhaps sent a deposit or what have you, and you want to have a record of that for your own purposes, the Notes field is just fine to do so. I recommend using the date input button, which immediately puts in today's date, and then whatever verbiage you'd like to record. Let's say client paid 50% deposit on Visa, and perhaps my initials as well. And if I click OK, I'm saving that note, which I can always review in the future. And notice now that there's a little asterisk in front of the Notes tab indicating that information has been recorded. To easily see all of the notes or any additional information for a particular project, we could use the purchase order listing or open purchase order reports. And those are accessed from our report window. Go under Project Management, Order Tracking, and we can print our purchase order listing. Let's narrow it down just to our Carter's Pennington Home project. And I can either use the summary or detail version. The summary is one line per purchase order, while the detail would show the purchase order and all of the components upon the purchase order. But we want to be sure to use the Show Status Notes as yes. And now we can see here is our brand new purchase order, and we can see all of the notes, even with the highlighted colors, etc. So we can have a nice printed document that can allow us to keep ourselves abreast of how payments are being directed between the client and vendor if desired. Last point on the purchase order. The easiest way to indicate that an order is complete is simply by marking the purchase order as manually closed on the purchase order status window. Again, that will be back to our status, and we can see a Close PO Manually option here. If I select that, click OK, notice that the purchase order drops out of the Open Purchase Order folder, and we can see it in our Closed Purchase Order folder right at the bottom. But if you want Design Manager to close the purchase order automatically, you're going to need to set the Purchase Order Close By option in the Company Advanced Options window. That is accessed off of File, Company Settings, Advanced, and then on the Purchase Order tab, we have a PO Closed By. The default in Design Manager is Vendor Invoice. In our case, we won't be entering in vendor invoices in this case, so we'd want to set it as Received. And upon doing so, we would then need to always input our received date and quantities for each of our items. When all of the components on that particular purchase order are received in full, Design Manager will close it automatically. Now, if you have some projects that are a traditional project relationship where you're buying on behalf of the client, they're paying you for both the merchandise and your design fee, along with projects where you might be having the client pay the vendor directly, you might not want to use that option because it's a company-wide option for purchase order close by. So by setting it as received, you would change it for every project regardless of the purchasing model. In our professional users, you also access your company advanced options from File, Company Information and Settings, Advanced, PO, and there's the exact same option here as well. Now that's how we handle the situation of clients paying the vendor directly in Design Manager Cloud. Now our professional cloud users have another option. We have an additional feature that assists in automatically setting a project into the proper mode for the circumstance when the client's paying the vendor directly. And this is known as our Agent 4 processing. We have many design firms that act solely as purchasing agents on behalf of commercial clients, and the Pro Cloud platform can really assist in doing so quite easily. Agent 4 processing can be set individually for projects, or if all projects for your company should be handled in this manner, we can set that at the company level as well. So if we wanted to configure our entire Design Manager for all of our clients to be Agent 4, we'd go back to our File, Company Information and Settings, back to Advanced, purchase orders, and notice there's the Agent 4 option here. That defaults down to each of our new projects, which could be subsequently changed. We go to our projects window, edit our Hilson project, defaults, advanced markup, purchase order, and we could select Agent 4 here. And upon doing so, a message comes up. It says when using Agent 4 for purchase orders, it is recommended that the percentage type be changed to fee for each component type on the General tab. Do you wish to do so now? I generally suggest to absolutely agree to that. So if we click yes, Design Manager is going to help configure our project properly. Notice it brings us right to the General tab and shows that it changed the pricing type to fee for all of our component types. Now, there's a few differences in this model than there was in the one I described for our Design Manager Cloud users. We want our purchasing fee percentage to be recorded with our merchandise, not with our design fee. Agent 4 is really predicated on a cost, on charging a percentage on the cost of the merchandise itself. So in this case, the only thing we'll be taxing is the fee itself. All of our others are untaxable, at least in my location, and all of our other percentages set to 0. In doing so, we don't need to make any changes to our proposal format or our invoicing, as Design Manager is going to make some automatic changes for us. Now, I've already configured our Carter's commercial project as set for Agent 4. Let's take a look at how some of those settings change other areas in the software. Let's go to our specification window by clicking on our items button. Let's take a look at our outdoor living area again, starting with the sofa. If we edit the component, we're going to see the window being slightly different than we're accustomed to. This is how it appears when the Agent 4 processing is being used. So we have our fee percentage type, our fee percentage itself, and then what we do is simply enter in the unit base cost. What will this sofa, what is the cost from the vendor for the sofa that the client will be paying? And then our price to the client is our percentage upon that cost. And we can see the same for the chairs. In this case, there's 2 of them, so my cost is 400 times 2 for 800, and it's that value from which I'm charging my 30% for my sell price of 240. Same for the bar stools and so on. Now, that's how the window looks a little bit different on our specification side. The purchase order is further changed to reflect that our company is acting as a purchasing agent on behalf of the client, and the payments will be made by the client themselves. Let's take a look at that difference. We go to our project purchase orders, and let's work on our Carter commercial project. We add a PO. This window has slightly changed as well. Notice that there's a column for client's cost. In other words, this is what the client will be charged. The estimated cost from our perspective is 0 for all of these. The client's going to be paying them all directly. Let's make a purchase order for all of these components by using our tag option, selecting all. Let's click OK. We'll generate our next purchase order. And notice there's some subtle differences in the document itself. We reduce the size of our company information, and we have an area indicating that we are the agent for a particular client. And it says we're an agent for this client, please use the following as a billing address. We're indicating to the vendor that Eric and Joanne Carter will be responsible for payments for these purchases on their commercial project. But within the body of the document, we still have all of our cost information as we would imagine. And there we go. And from here, we have all of our information that we might find necessary. We can do all of our order tracking information. We can use our notes field as I described previously, etc. So we'll be handling all the purchasing details ourselves, while the carders will be handling all of the fiscal information on their side. And lastly, if we go to ultimately invoicing the client in the agent form mechanism, we go to our accounting tab, client invoices. Let's click our add invoice button. Put in our project. Let's invoice for all of our outdoor living area. Furniture. Tag my location again. And let's print our invoice. And now notice we're only showing the purchasing fee for each of the items rather than all of the costs associated with them. So this invoice reflects exactly our revenue coming from the client, which is just from that purchasing fee. So the agent form processing in the professional platform gives you another layer of automation and sophistication, particularly if your firm is exclusively working with situations you're acting as a purchasing agent. And that brings us to our end of our discussion on clients paying vendors today. And today's discussion, we reviewed both the practical steps in configuring Design Manager or Design Manager Professional to handle projects where the client's paying the vendor directly, and I tried to highlight some of the considerations upon doing so in the earlier portion of the discussion. We also discussed Agent 4 processing in Design Manager Pro Cloud that further customizes the software to handle that situation. And remember, if you want more information on some of the topics we discussed today, such as proposals, invoices, purchase orders, etc., be sure to go to our Help Center, our Webinars menu, select Recorded Webinars, and you'll see topics for all of those. You'll see recordings for all of those topics that you can review again at your leisure. I'd like to thank everyone for